Okay, hello everyone. You probably just heard the announcement, but we are recording this evening's event. So if you would like your camera to be off, I would go ahead and do that now. If you haven't already muted your microphone, please go ahead and do that as well. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lindsay Palega. I am the co-chair of the Reproductive Rights Committee here at the St. Petersburg League alongside Sarah Terry. We're going to do something a little bit different tonight. Right now, I'm going to ask everyone if you could please turn off your cameras and change your name to Anon. So A-N-O-N. To change your name, go down to your name if you see it in the corner of the screen and right click. Or if you go to your little bubble that's floating, depending how you have your view in the gallery, your window that shows you, hit those three little dots in the corner. And in that, you can hit rename and you can change your name to Anon, A-N-O-N. So we're going to do this anonymously tonight. And if you have a profile picture, if you could take that off, you do that the same way. So the reason we're doing this is tonight we're asking members to share stories if they have them. So I want everyone to go black if they can. And if you want to come back online and you're comfortable showing your face or name, totally fine. I just want everyone to have the ability to be anonymous at the forefront here. And you can always change it back if you want your name and face shared. All right. So for the comfort of our audience members, you don't need to stay anonymous, but this is what we're going to do at the beginning. If anyone is having problems, please send me or Steph Sembler a chat or send a chat to the whole group, and I think somebody can help walk you through it. Again, if you could change your name to A-N-O-N, Anon, and take your camera off, that would be very helpful, very welcome. Okay, blank faces. So just a couple of league agenda items this month. We're starting back our monthly Repro Action Team meetings. Those are going to be conducted virtually. You can register for those at a Zoom link that Steph is going to drop in the chat. We've got that, I think it's July 25th, I believe, something like that. That'll be from 6:30 to 7. We're going to try to make them short and sweet. These meetings will include updates from the Yes on 4 Coalition, upcoming events and registrations in our community, and other ways to get involved. The call is meant to bring issues to your attention and share success stories and strategies as we move towards November's vote. So to be included in those calls, you must be a member of the St. Pete Repro Team Google group, not just a general member of the St. Pete League. And Steph will also drop that registration if you're a part of the St. Pete League and not yet part of our Repro team. So many of you here this evening are already League members, but we open this event up to the public because we believe this information is so important to share with voters. For those not familiar, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots organization that works to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. So the League's nonpartisan. Why are we talking about abortion, Amendment 4, and IVF? Because this is a nonpartisan issue. Without the ability to make reproductive decisions for your own body, all people cannot participate equally in our democracy. Our Repro Rights Action Team stands for equal and safe access to a full range of reproductive health care, from abortion to birth control to evidence-based sex education to access to fertility care and beyond. Although we haven't taken a formal stance on the man with 1,000 children, if you watch that Netflix limited series, I do think it's safe to say that we might draw the line at reproductive fraud. Unfortunately, as it stands, we have a 6-week abortion ban in effect in Florida. Our panelists tonight are here to tell us about the real impacts of abortion bans and government interference with reproductive health, pre-Roe and post-Roe. To end the near total abortion ban we're living under, the Florida League is working with the Yes on 4 Coalition to pass a constitutional amendment that will limit government interference with abortion. Amendment 4, which will appear on the November ballot, reads, "No law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider." Our success in November depends on each of us getting involved in the Yes on 4 campaign. There's many ways to volunteer. So I'm going to tell you a couple of those ways, and the registration links will be dropped in the chat. All of these can be found at our link tree. Full disclosure, Amy Weintraub, who normally puts the link tree together, is out this week due to a very tragic death in her family. She has control of the link tree. I do not, so some events have not been updated yet. But I will tell you that all of these updates come from the Progress Florida emails. While the League does not endorse Progress Florida, that is where I'm getting this information, and I am happy to provide you with the link to sign up for those emails. Again, not league sponsored, but a very good place for info on the Yes on 4 campaign and more ways to get involved. There's also plenty of information about events on the Yes on 4 campaign website, which is under Floridians Protecting Freedom. First off, this month, there's the Yes on 4 Super Saturday taking place on July 20th, both in person and virtually. The sign-up link's going in the chat. This month, partners will be hosting a Canvas launch. Volunteers will learn how to talk about Amendment 4 and connect with voters. There's also opportunities for canvassing, phone banking, storytelling, just like tonight, and community meetings. Next, Yes on 4 is urging supporters to use a relational organizing app called Reach, which I hope you've all heard about, but if you haven't, it's used to connect voters in your own personal network of friends and family. You'll then track who's already been reached and how they're planning to vote in 4. It's a really cool tool. I've never seen anything like it. It's a really good information gathering base, which, you know, for those with privacy concerns, I do privacy law, and this app doesn't concern me as much as many things out there. So that's a great links in there. We have weekly Reach trainings on Tuesdays at 5:15 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up at that link. And then Yes on 4 also holds weekly live campaign phone banks on Thursdays at 6 p.m. There's no experience necessary. You never need to have phone bank before. Yes on 4 will provide that training and support you while you're making the calls, and you can do it from the comfort of your own home. Remember, the sign-up websites for all these opportunities are found in our link tree that will be updated hopefully next week. Otherwise, just go to the Yes on 4 campaign website. Our next event in this series of panels will be August 7th at 6 p.m. You can register for that now, and we'll also be putting that out on our social and all of our regular chains of marketing. Finally, I know you guys are ready for me to stop, so I'm just going to tell you to join your local league if you have not already. Local leagues are doing so much important work on the environment, education, voter engagement, and on reproductive health. There's something here for everyone, no matter your political party you're traditionally identified with. We're the group that puts out those really great Vote 411 guides you might have used to learn about your candidates each voting season. We're also a completely volunteer-based organization. We understand your time, energy, and finances are not endless. So come when you can to events, take on as much or as little as you like. Membership's available on a pay-what-you-can basis, and that includes donations larger than the suggested membership amounts. An important update in that vein is that the last day to register to vote in August elections here in Florida is July 22nd. So mark your calendars. The league gives you all sorts of fun updates like that. For you non-locals, there are local and state leagues all around the country. They're a great way to get involved in your community and impact your local and state government. They'll keep reminding you of all these same deadlines and get you tuned into all of the local things happening near you. So for those local people who are here today, if you didn't get the many blasts we sent out over the last couple of days, we do have yard signs, bumper stickers, and palm cards on Yes on 4. They're available at my house and at Allendale Church at our office. Please send me a text or email if you would like to arrange pickup. They are free to members and non-members. They can be, you can take some for a small donation, $5 or $10, and we're happy to part with them if you'll stick the sign in your yard. All right, so with that, let me introduce our guest panelists this evening, Sue and Marla. Sue joins us this evening to share a story of her family's experience with abortion care. She's been in healthcare since a young age. When her military dad was diagnosed with MS, she was inspired by her experience to go out and get some really impressive degrees. Then she helped build out the continuum of care in the US. For a decade, she's been a pro bono nonpartisan citizen lobbyist for AARP and passionate about equal access to medical care, medications, and other support services for all. All right, Sue, are you ready to kick it off?
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. It's with deep love, honor, and respect that I share the 1940s experience of my aunt, who passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 100 and a half. For a reference point, wanted people to know that we come from a Catholic family, and until the day she died, was a regular church attendee. So you can imagine what a emotional, moral, and psychological hit it was for her to find out she was pregnant before she got married, and the shame associated with that. not wanting to go locally for care. Unfortunately, she went down to Chicago. She was in Milwaukee. She went down to Chicago and had a back alley abortion that left her so scarred she could never have children. And while my younger sister and I benefited from her love, my uncle unfortunately would not adopt children that weren't his own. And this family secret wasn't revealed to me until I was a preteen. My mom and I had gone to church, and they wanted my mother to sign an anti-abortion petition at the back of the church when the service ended. My mother shepherded me out the side door, and I wondered, what is all this about at the tender age of 13? This led to a discussion, and I realized I had never asked why my aunt didn't have any children. So my mother told me what had happened at that time. I never let my aunt know that I knew, and this haunted her for almost 80 years. This is why I'm so ardent about quality and access to care. What a loss it was. She would have made a wonderful, wonderful biological mother. So that, in a nutshell, is our story and why I'm so passionate about this issue.
Thanks, Sue. We really appreciate you sharing your story. We're hoping that others here this evening might feel comfortable enough sharing their own story. If you're just joining, you'll notice that people have changed their name to Anon, and the participants over here on the side. If you haven't already done that, if you could please do that. If you have any intention of sharing a story this evening, please go ahead and remove a profile picture, turn your camera off, and change to Anon, so anyone who feels comfortable speaking can do so anonymously. If you have no concerns sharing whether anonymously or not, obviously leave your camera on, leave your name as it is. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marla. Marla is going to walk us through the legal barriers that existed after Dobbs in the world of family planning and pre-Dobbs. She's a partner at Greenspoon, Marder, Surrogacy, and Assisted Reproductive Technology Practice Group, which she founded. She represents parties working with a surrogate, egg, sperm, or embryo donor. She experienced her own infertility journey for many years and ultimately worked with a gestational surrogate to build her family. She focuses on helping others start a family using available third-party reproductive technologies and adoption laws, and she's passionate about reproductive rights. All right, Marla, do you want me to start your slideshow now?
Oh, that'd be great. Just first of all, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so honored to be here. And Sue, thank you so much for sharing your family story. As Lindsay mentioned, I have a personal experience with reproductive issues. My husband and I suffered years of infertility and repeat miscarriages, and ultimately worked with a surrogate to have my kids. And that's what brought me to start the practice group at my law firm, where I focus exclusively on legal issues pertaining to surrogacy, egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation. So everything happening with Roe and Dobbs really impacts my clients, my practice area, and obviously everybody in so many different ways. So that'd be great. We can start with the PowerPoint. I don't see it. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you. You can skip this and the next slide. It's just my introduction. As Lindsay kind of introduced me, I feel very passionate about this area of law, and abortion rights, selective reduction, all the legal rights to perform these procedures really come up every day in my work, as far as intended parents working with a surrogate who's carrying their child, and the legal ability for the parties to have an abortion, depending on the state they're located in. So as of now, and I'm sure this is a very educated group that knows so much about Roe and Dobbs, but I'm just going to give a little overview of how these cases are impacting the right to access IVF treatments and the concerns that people are seeing that are huge topics in the upcoming election. 2 years post Dobbs, which the case overturned Roe v. Wade, basically took away the state's rights took away the federal protections to have an abortion, leaving the decisions regarding abortion to the states. Ever since Dobbs was passed, many states have now enacted very restrictive laws regarding the right to have an abortion. And either it's very difficult to have one done, or it's extremely restrictive. And all the fallout from the Dobbs case really has had such a trickle-down effect to not only abortion rights, but also the right to IVF access, what status is provided to frozen embryos. And, these were big concerns that a lot of us had in the reproductive legal field when we felt like Roe was going to be overturned, when Donald Trump said he was going to make that his mission in his previous campaign. And, reproductive issues and infertility is a disease, and it impacts so many people. One of the leading organizations that helps advocate for infertility issues, called Resolve, states that at least 1 in 6 people suffer from the disease of infertility. So you can imagine how many people are concerned about their ability to access IVF, to create and store frozen embryos, and trickle down all the way to the right to proceed with surrogacy, and trust that the person carrying your child might have the legal ability to have an abortion if need be. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So the big fallout that we saw in IVF access post-Dobbs was the case in Alabama, which essentially was back in February of this year, where the case determined that a frozen embryo, which is basically just a few days of a fertilized egg and sperm, was given personhood status. So the court in Alabama found that a frozen embryo outside the body, just in the tubes or in the vials, was treated as if it was a child, an unborn child. Therefore, if the embryo was destroyed or harmed in any way, that could impose criminal liability to the clinic, to the handler of the embryos, or possibly to the patient. So when the case in Alabama came down in February, essentially all the clinics in Alabama just stopped treating patients that were mid-cycle. The clinics were afraid to treat patients because they could be subject to civil penalty, because in many IVF cycles, embryos, you're using them, so you don't know what's going to happen. They could be destroyed, they could be transferred and not result in a pregnancy, and they were afraid that because of this case, they could be subject to criminal liability. So, and this case was just so interesting in a way. It's the basis of it was there was a fertility clinic who had stored embryos in their lab, and the embryos within the frozen storage tank were dropped, not by the medical provider, by a patient who basically snuck into the lab, picked up a cryogenic frozen embryo container, which has sub-zero temperatures, and dropped it because it was freezing cold, and the embryos were destroyed. A group of the patients sued the clinic and brought a cause of action under a case from 1872, predating IVF, basically under a wrongful death claim, and they were successful. Now, as I said, the case came out from the Alabama Supreme Court. IVF clinics stopped treating patients, and as the quickest legislation I've ever seen, Alabama basically came out with a new law right away, essentially, almost too broad in a sense that it gave blanket immunity to providers, people that ship embryos and patients, which basically said, no, we don't want to stop IVF, which was a good outcome, but it was a very overbroad ruling. So what happened in Alabama really, I think, scared a lot of other states that they have to carefully, if they're going to make personhood status rules, they really have to carefully craft the law, because what happened in Alabama really was a disaster. And I don't think any even Republicans, Democrats alike, didn't want to see IVF stop and patients not be treated. So, and as of now, embryos generally are treated as personal property. What happens to them in the event of death or divorce or unforeseen circumstances, that varies from state to state. But currently, embryos are generally treated as personal property, not as a human life. This is embryos outside the human body. If you could go to the next slide. So, from the Alabama case and in granting personhood status to embryos, this just raised so many concerns for those undergoing IVF. I got many, many calls because one of the first concerns is if embryos are given personhood status and you can't destroy an embryo, clients of mine that are going through IVF have embryos that could be frozen indefinitely, essentially. So they were concerned, can they ship them to a state where it's permissible to do what they want? Or would there be implications if they use them and don't get pregnant? If all the other states were chattering about having personhood status states, they were concerned they would move it from one state to another conservative state. So, I just suggested that people that have frozen embryos contact the IVF clinic or contact the long-term storage facility, because sometimes these embryos are created in one state and shipped off to another state, and find out what the provider's plans were as far as how they were going to be handling the use of embryos. And if client felt it was necessary, move the embryos to a state where they felt comfortable. This had implications for estate planning. If embryos were given personhood status, essentially, people that have frozen embryos might need to address this in their estate documents as to what happens to their child, which is the embryo. But regardless, anyone going through IVF should have an estate plan and address if they have frozen genetic material with their estate planning attorney. It had implications with divorce law. In theory, if an embryo is considered a human life, then could this have implications for child support for couples getting a divorce that have frozen embryos? Now, what we're still concerned about is if more personhood laws come out or IVF is further restricted. We're concerned, for example, in Italy, there is a restriction that a couple can only create 3 embryos at a time, and they have to transfer all of them at each time. So if something like that were to happen in the United States, this could really increase the cost of IVF if couples are limited in how many embryos they're allowed to make, forcing them to use them instead of freeze the embryos. This could create bans on destroying embryos when couples are done. Even if there was an abnormality with the embryo, that couples might not be able to destroy them, and they would have to then freeze this indefinitely or redonate to another couple. And freezing of embryos is not a cheap endeavor. You have to pay typically a yearly fee to have your embryos frozen. So just overall, these restrictions could really increase the cost of IVF or the time it takes to get pregnant, which is a concern to so many for a process that's already very expensive. So you can go to the next slide, please. And as I was saying before, after the Alabama case, that really shook the nation when they saw the fallout from what the personhood status to embryos did to the clinics in Alabama. Just recently, Texas actually declined to address a personhood status law within their books. So at least the trend generally is that it seems like states are reluctant to pass personhood status laws until possibly they figure out how exactly to tailor it to the restrictions that they might want. So Florida also immediately withdrew a proposed law to give personhood status to the embryos right after the Alabama case fallout. So as of now, the courts are not, there's not like a rush to give personhood status to embryos nationwide, at least not yet. Next slide, please. So as far as protections to IVF, as far as the backlash from post-Dobbs, post-Alabama case, there was recently a proposed Right to IVF Act that would have had so many really wonderful protections to those seeking IVF. It provided patients' rights, the rights to use your embryos as necessary. It had insurance protections. It had protections for armed force members, and the proposed law was rejected by Republicans. Actually, 2 Republicans voted in favor of it, but otherwise it was rejected, and so that law is currently blocked. Republicans proposed a type of right to IVF protection law. It had more to do with like payments and Medicaid and insurance, but the Democrats rejected that. So right now, post-Dobbs, there is no national law to protect IVF access, right to IVF, and obviously no national protection to abortion. If you could change the slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, within the surrogacy law practice that I handle, within any surrogacy contract, the parties discuss before anyone's even pregnant what their wishes would be if there was some form of abnormality with the fetus, or if the surrogate's life was at risk, whether or not she's willing to have an abortion or a selective reduction. The parties actually discuss this before they're pregnant in a mental health evaluation that's done prior to entering into a legal agreement. And then the parties' understanding is then codified within the surrogacy agreement. That being said, for example, I practice in Florida. Even if the parties agree that the surrogate is willing to respect the parent's wishes and have an abortion if something was wrong with the fetus or something for her life or safety, she might not be able to have it done in Florida based, because of the current 6-week ban with limited exceptions to be able to have the abortion. So currently within the contract, as long as it doesn't subject the surrogate to civil or criminal penalty, we typically provide that the surrogate would agree to travel outside of Florida at the parent's expense to have the abortion or the reduction done if need be. And that's how this is being handled in a lot of states that are very restrictive on abortion, because the surrogate might need to have it done. And if she's unable to have the abortion and has the child, the parents always have to assume rights to the child, regardless of any impairment. So it's in everyone's best interest that the child's if God forbid there was something wrong with it, that the parties discuss what they're willing to do with, if they even want to have the abortion in the first place, and if the surrogate's willing to not only have the abortion, but also travel outside of the state to have it done. And so that's kind of what I see in my practice area as far as abortion and reduction. Selective reduction, which is essentially reducing like 3 fetuses down to 2 if need be. I think next slide. I think I'm just pretty much wrapping it up. Yeah, so as Lindsay said at the beginning, vote. That's one of the most important things you could do. Support the yes on 4. And if you want more information on Resolve, the organization I mentioned at the beginning that does a ton of advocacy work for reproductive rights, IVF access, they talk about abortion rights and things like that. You can check out resolve.org. And if you have any questions or ever want to speak with me about not only my personal experience with surrogacy or the legal issues that surround this area, I'm happy to speak with you. So please feel free to reach out with any questions. And thank you so much for having me today.
Okay, you would think I'd be better at this, but I lost my Zoom, so just give me a second, everyone. I'm here. Okay, here we go. Thank you so much, Marla. Okay, so if you joined a little late, you might be confused why everyone has changed their name to Anon. We are going to give people an opportunity to share their own personal stories with abortion, IVF, surrogacy, adoptions, anything that matters and that you feel is impacted by some of the legislation that's been introduced in Florida and around the country in the last couple of years since Dobbs. If you have not already done so and you would like to share anonymously, please go ahead and rename yourself and turn your camera off. You can do that by, if you kind of hover over your window where your face would be, hit those 3 dots in the top right corner and hit rename. That also gives you an option to edit your profile picture if you have a profile picture you'd like to remove. We'll also give a couple of minutes here while people do that. Does anyone have questions for Marla specifically about her work, about some of the IVF legislation that's been introduced or anything like that?
And if anybody wants to reach out with my email, please, Lindsay, if it could be shared maybe in the notes, I'm happy to, talk directly offline. Okay.
Thanks, Marla. Sorry, I'm doing 3 things at once right now. I'm really impressive over here. We do have a member story. Somebody has anonymously messaged me. If that person would like to unmute themselves and go ahead and tell their story, I know it's one I think I've heard before, and it's very impactful. Before these get going, I want to share the purpose of why we're doing this. It's not because I think we should or need to share these stories publicly. I understand they're very re-traumatizing for a lot of people, but it's impactful. It helps humanize these things when you're talking to a friend or family member who might think that yes on 4 doesn't matter, or that this IVF legislation doesn't impact them. It does. Every single person in this country knows somebody who's had an abortion, has needed assisted fertility care, has used it. And a lot of people, there's the stigma behind it. And I'm not saying that we all need to sit down at the table and talk about this every night, every day. But I think that it's important that people who haven't had that experience, who don't feel comfortable with it, have a story to tell and a story that resonates with them. And our stories, when sharing them publicly like this, we're gifting them to them, anonymously or not. We're giving that to somebody who might not have their own story or might not know somebody, because even though they do, we all know they know somebody. That person has never felt comfortable sharing it with them. So maybe instead of talking about themselves or their loved ones, they can say, well, I was on this call and I listened to a real person tell their real story. And that's the purpose of this evening. It's not because I think this is entertaining or enjoyable. It's because it's important for us to communicate the importance of this campaign and of all the work we have to continue doing on things like Resolve. A lot of I do work on judicial bypass cases. I don't think this is the end of reproductive rights in Florida or the country. There's a lot happening in this space that just isn't discussed. But Yes on 4 is the beginning to restoring rights that we lost. So with that, if the member who is prepared to share their story would like to unmute themselves and share, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure, I think that's me. This is Judy Galizzi. I am a member of the League. My story took place in June of 1966, right after I had graduated from the university. I was taking a trip with a friend of mine down to San Antonio, Texas. We were in Kansas, actually. That's where I graduated, Kansas State University. So anyway, we were taking the trip to San Antonio, and all during the trip, every bathroom visit I checked, and I was not having my period. Well, I was the most regular person probably around, so I knew by the end of this trip that I was sort of in trouble. So when we got back to Kansas City, I decided that I had to make an appointment with a gynecologist, which I really had never been to before because I had no reason to have been. And, at that time, there were no drugstore tests, so you couldn't just go and buy a test and take a test. So you had to put on your big girl pants and go see a gynecologist. And of course, at that time, there was a stigma to being pregnant and unmarried. So, you had to deal with a little bit of preaching and, a little looking down at you because you were no longer a good girl. But anyway, got through that, decided that I could probably solve this problem myself. So I went to the library because there was no Google, and I decided I would see if I could find out something that might impact an early pregnancy and maybe do away with it. So I kind of surreptitiously pulled out a book and started reading about things that might impact early pregnancy. I discovered that quinine could do it, or thought quinine could do it, read that quinine could do it, and found some quinine tablets, took them for several days, probably a pretty high dose, because I thought, well, this will work. The only thing that happened, the only result I had from that was a serious ringing in my ears, which was kind of scary. So I decided it was not a good idea and that I should finally just tell my boyfriend that we had a problem here. So I called him, and we didn't have to discuss this very long. I mean, neither one of us were ready to be parents by any means. We had both just graduated. He was on his way to California to go to law school. I had just been hired by the Food and Drug Administration as an inspector. There were very few female inspectors in the United States. And as a matter of fact, the gentleman that interviewed me for this job really didn't want to hire me. He told me that. He said, I don't think women should be doing this job. You're taking a job away from a man, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I didn't want to be the person that proved him right. So I thought, we have to do something about this. So Jim fortunately had a friend who knew somebody out in central Kansas in a small town that was about 4 hours away from Kansas City. So we made a rather elaborate plan. We had to tell lies to everybody concerned why he had to borrow his parents' car to go out to, have it all day and night. I had to tell my new supervisor a story. So I decided I'd tell him that I had dental work that needed to be completed back out in Manhattan. So I would have to miss the day because the dentist just had to finish this work. As it turned out, I needed to bring back, some kind of a medical thing to show because I was such a new employee, had to bring back a little form that said, I had gone to this dentist. So Jim, I don't know, somehow he got a form and he forged it. So then I'm thinking, oh my God, if they find out about this, it's bad enough that I'm getting an abortion, but then I'm lying, we're forging things. I mean, got to be sort of elaborate. So anyway, he was able to get an appointment on a Friday. So we met up early that morning. We drove the 4 hours. We got to the place. We really didn't know who this person was. As it turns out, the fellow who did this was a chiropractor, which, it could have been worse. It wasn't back alley. The guy was a chiropractor. So anyway, short wait in the waiting room, hauled into a small examining room. Can't remember if I was put in a gown or I was just told to take off my bottom clothing, but whatever. I don't remember anyone else being in the room either. There was certainly no ultrasound. There was no Valium. There was no anesthetic. There was not even hand holding. I mean, it was just, let's do it, which in a way was fine because I just wanted to get it done. I wanted to get out of there before the police came or something. I mean, you always have this thought in the back of your mind. And it was, I have to say, it was painful. Maybe it's like childbirth, though. I don't really remember it too much, nor do I like thinking about it, but I just felt like he was kind of scraping me. So he finished up. He said, I'm not sure I got it all. And if I didn't, then you'll have to come back. But he said, take these maxi pads. And if you bleed through more than 2 in an hour, you need to seek help. So fortunately, that didn't happen. We, after the procedure, we got back in the car, drove 4 hours back to Kansas City, spent the night in a motel, was bleeding and had cramps, but certainly survived. And I have to say that, I thought about the physical harm of this whole thing, but I really thought more about not getting caught. It played heavy on my mind, even for a year after. My Jim was a political science major, and I thought if he runs for office, people could find out about this, and it'll be out there for everyone to know. So that to me was almost harder than the physical part of going through the, not knowing who was doing an abortion on you, et cetera. I later discovered that this physician, this chiropractor, was convicted of performing an abortion or causing an abortion, I think it was. And the reason I could even find that was just several years ago that I looked it up. It was because the case went to the Kansas Supreme Court. So it was, there were some things on Google. You could Google a bit of the doctor's name. I remembered his name. Anyway, that's my story. And I'm glad to tell it. I've told it a few times before. I think it's important for people to know what you have to go through if you can't get a legal and safe abortion.
Thank you. I think the one thing that stuck out for me, I don't know if it stuck out for others, is that what we're seeing on the anti-argument, the people who are opposing yes on 4, they're arguing that by legalizing abortion and limiting the government interference in abortion, that people like dentists, tattoo artists, and chiropractors will be the ones performing abortion. But if you look back at the story pre-Roe, the very people who were performing them at that time were the people mentioned, and that was when things weren't legal. I think that says a lot, that the argument they're making is it's in inverse of itself. It's exactly what it was. Thank you so much for sharing that. We really appreciate it. I know the audience appreciates you opening up like that. It's not an easy story to tell, and I'm so glad that you're okay and that you made it this many years and have had such a beautiful life since then, and that the government did not get to make your decision for you, in that sense, that you did what you needed to do for yourself anyway. So we really,
I have had a daughter since then, so that was, there was no physical damage that prevented my getting pregnant. So,
which is, there we go. There's another argument used by the anti-side that it'll lead to infertility. So yeah, and as we heard, that's the people who are very much trying to get pregnant from Marla earlier are also struggling because of legislation like this from the same groups of people. So does anyone else here have a story they'd like to tell? Especially if you're anonymously, it doesn't need to be your own personal story. If you have a friend or family member or somebody that in life that you have a pre or post-Roe story to share, you can go ahead and raise your hand or just unmute and chat away. No one else?
I'll tell my story. First off, I want to say thank you to Judy. I've known Judy for a couple years now. This is Stephanie Sembler, and she and I have worked at the abortion clinic as escorts for a couple years. And I've heard Judy tell the story, but I've never heard it in its entirety, and it's so impactful. And so I really appreciate you, Judy, for reaching down and digging out the details, because I know how hard that is. My story was much simpler. I was living in a world under Roe, where I had protections, and I was living in Denver at the time. I was 20 years old. I was in a committed relationship, and just had the ultimate whoopsie. It just we were careful, but sometimes just things happen. And I didn't figure it out until I was 7 weeks pregnant, and it took me 3 weeks to get an appointment. And so I often think about today about that version of me as a 20-year-old. If she had been living in Florida in 2024, I would have had to travel out of state or try to get abortion pills in the mail or be forced to give birth under the current laws here in Florida. And it's just such, it's sad when you think about your younger self and, and the women that don't have the protections that I had just, 15 years ago. So it's definitely my why and why I'm fighting hard. And I'm always very thankful to be surrounded by women such as you all, to be able to tell my story without shame, because, I made a choice that I don't regret and was the right one. And so, yeah.
Thank you. We really appreciate sharing. I think that's
Lindsay,
yeah.
This is just Judy again. I just want to say I have never, ever, ever regretted it. Ever.
Yeah, I haven't heard many regrets. And for those who don't know, who didn't hear me earlier, I'm a local attorney here, and I work on judicial bypass cases with minors who are seeking abortion care. And often I continue to have a relationship with those clients afterwards because it's such a personal thing we go through together. We fight really hard to get them the approval, and especially under this ban, it's really difficult to get them in time. And I've not met a young woman yet who has regretted her decision, at least not for the reasons that people who oppose abortion often state, that they actually regret having the abortion. I haven't had that ever happen. Had lots of people who are afraid of stigma, of being judged, of law enforcement, of the judges themselves, but no regrets for the decision they've made, because by the time they've come to it, they've given it a great deal of thought. Does anyone else have a story? If you do, you want to go ahead and unmute now or raise your hand. If not, I'll go ahead and share a story. I have several I could tell from personal experiences, family members, friends, and obviously through my work with judicial bypass cases. But I think there's one story in particular that I want to tell that happened very recently with a judicial bypass client. And it's something that I'll never forget I'm sure in my entire life, but it's probably by far been the most impactful thing I've done in my career. It was right before the 6-week ban went into place, which obviously we were all well aware of what was about to happen, and everyone involved in abortion clinics and judicial bypass work knew this was coming for us. So I received a request to take on this client about a week and 3 days before the 6-week ban was to come into effect. We didn't know how far along this young woman was. She's 16 years old. She found out actually she was pregnant by visiting her gynecologist's office for what she thought was some sort of infection. Her mom was actually in the room with her and staunchly religious and anti-abortion. The workers at her doctor's office were pretty great and did something that I don't think a lot of doctors would have done. They asked her to come take another test, and when she went into the hallway, they pulled her aside to say, you're the first entry test when you take the pregnancy test when you come through, they said it was positive, you're pregnant. And they handed her a pamphlet on her options. I don't think many doctors, especially in Florida, would have done that. It's a great risk to their careers, but they did that. And that's how she came to us and found the Jane Network and got connected with an attorney. So at that point, we knew we didn't have much time. The same evening that we got the email saying she needed counsel, I reached out to her. We had a long call on the phone. They were using protection, and just the same thing. It's a whoopsie, and something slipped through. So she ended up pregnant, and when she got in for her ultrasound, she was 5 weeks. So we now have 1 week and 3 days until the 6-week ban. And she has 1 week until she hits 6 weeks, which we knew we weren't going to make by 3 days. And to get a judicial bypass in Florida, it requires you to request an appointment with the court. Once you get that appointment, so you have to personally go in person, file your paperwork, then they have to assign a case number, and a hearing has to be set with a judge. Even if you file emergency motions to try to get a quicker hearing, getting that even within a day, a business day, is near impossible. So in this case, we got her in 48 hours to meet with the judge. Once we got to the hearing with the judge, the court reporter had been reassigned to a different case. We had to wait for a different court reporter. By the time we got a new court reporter, we've already been there 2 hours. The judge's judicial assistant had lost our filing and said we couldn't move forward to get this much needed order unless we had the original filing. So now I'm fighting with the judge in her private chambers. We're talking about how there's a 6-week ban, and finally the judge looks at me and goes, look, I know my judicial assistant did this. I know her beliefs, and I know mine are different. And I'm granting this, and we're going to find a way to do it. I just don't know what I'm going to do right now to make this right and legal. And so we've now been there 4 hours. This poor girl has missed a day of school to get to the courthouse to file her paperwork, and another day for this hearing. full day, and is lying to her parents, and at the time being parents who are part of the reason she decided she needed this abortion. She didn't feel like it was a safe environment to bring a child home into. So in on that motion, for those who don't know, when you argue to the judge that they need a bypass, you're arguing that they're mature enough to make that decision. I know there's a lot of irony in that standard in Florida, but that's what it is. So I had written about 20 pages on why this young woman was mature enough to make the decision, including the grades she gets, the extracurriculars she's involved in, the fact that she sought out counsel to begin with, et cetera, et cetera. The judge took a really long time writing a really perfect order, because we know these things get appealed a lot. We did get our order. We did finally walk out that day at close of business, very end of the day. We walked out with the order. Now we need to get her an appointment at a clinic. She has to bring her order to the clinic, and then there is the waiting period. So this is a Thursday. We know she's not getting in Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. The earliest she's getting in is Monday. And we are almost to the 6-week ban, and all the appointments are full. So we're calling every abortion fund, Planned Parenthood, every single clinic, and begging, like everyone else in the state, to please let her in before the 6-week ban. Because if she was, once that day hit, she was 3 days over. So we did get her in. She took a much needed appointment, and we found out at that appointment where she got the ultrasound that she had miscarried. And I have to think that part of the reason she miscarried is because we went through a lot trying to get her there because of that ban. And it's something, and maybe, maybe it wasn't, maybe it's just one of those things. It was going to happen anyway, or it wasn't, but she had, and we put her through all of that, risked her relationship with her family, with her school. She missed much needed school right before exams. Her teachers were literally calling her, asking where she was while we were sitting at the courthouse. So there were things like that. I mean, it was so completely unnecessary. And then in the end, she didn't need an abortion anyway. It was one of those things where, I mean, there's a lot of messages that I think I could probably sit and analyze that story for a long time, but legislating around these reproductive decisions doesn't work. And that's just one example. Yes on 4 won't change judicial bypasses, and that's something I'm going to continue to press for my entire career. That legislation needs to change for the reasons I just shared. That story is just one example of many, but there's a lot that needs to be done here, and yes on 4 is a really good beginning. It shows our government what we believe, that these things shouldn't be touched, that they're our own decisions. And yeah, so that's the story I wanted to share with everyone tonight. It's not my own, but it's one that I can never stop thinking about, because there's so much happening there. So with that, unless anybody else has something to share, we're almost at 7. Does anyone have questions, or anyone want to chime in and share a story? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question for you, Lindsay. Are you able to tell which judge maybe it's best to go before? Do you have a choice?
Yeah, so no. We can't, they call that court shopping. We can't do that. We have to file in the district. That we have a little bit of leeway. For instance, certain counties will let you file in the county next door, and sometimes the county next door is more friendly, but there's so many judges in each one. Typically what I do is I do some heavy research on the judge before I go in. And if it's somebody who even if I can find a Facebook post by that judge that, makes me think that they might not grant this thing, I immediately contact an appellate firm so that we already have motions drafted to appeal the case if we needed to, which in this instance wouldn't have helped. We wouldn't have got there in time. So at that point, we would have been working to try to get her to another state. But that's some of the things that are happening in the background. And it takes a lot of volunteers. Most of these young women are vulnerable and don't have the funds to begin with. So yeah, I wish we could pick our judges. I know who I would pick.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Anyone else, any questions for Marla or anyone who shared a story, or anyone want to share theirs before we wrap up?
Well, just a question. It seems like in general, we think that the Amendment 4 will pass. If it, for some reason, again, I think it's going to be a weird election because I think a lot of young people are not going to be particularly interested in some of the higher races.
Mhm.
Do we think that they'll still get out and vote for something like this? And if it doesn't pass, do we have alternatives after this? Can we come back with the same thing in 2 years, 4 years, or what, what are our long-term options?
Yeah, I'll take this unless Marla feels like she has something to add to this, or anyone else. Yeah,
For
so
it.
okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm feeling very confident about the passage of 4. We've watched every other state who's proposed something similar pass by a pretty big landfall in terms of how these numbers tend to go in votes. I'm feeling pretty good about that. I'm speaking personally here, not on behalf of the league or anyone else, when I say the debate scared me a little bit, because we need people to show up. And so I think the message there is, don't be afraid to put the yard sign in your yard. I have them here at my house. I know a lot of people don't like to put that on display, but we've got polling that shows 80% of Floridians plus feel like this issue should not be touched by the government. So I think that just like these brave people here today have shared stories, we shouldn't be afraid to say this loudly and proudly, that this is not something that I think we need to be fearful of. Like in the past, maybe we did. It's Roe happened for a reason, because the public, the judiciary saw that the public really wanted this. So, but in terms of if it doesn't, what's next? Yes, we can rework the language and try to do it again. There's nothing to say, like just how medical marijuana has been on the ballot multiple times. And what happens is they revisit with a bunch of really good constitutional law experts, and they put together a whole new set of language, and they'll try again. But frankly, the campaign has put so much time and money and already has the best people on this, and really worked with the other states that did it first to model our language and the campaign strategies after it, that I feel really, really confident that we're going to get this through. Especially if, when we talk about the apathy that you're just talking about with voters who might not feel as enthused by some of the higher elections, then, I wouldn't normally say this in an election season, but if the only thing they care about is going and voting yes on 4, encourage them to do it. Encourage them to think more deeply about whether they might want to participate in those other elections. But I still think we can say going out and voting on this amendment is worthwhile. And maybe hopefully they think through some of the other stuff and they do some more research, because they go, I'm already going, I'm already filling out the ballot. Oh, I didn't even know this was on here. Maybe I'll do some research. So trying to get the mail-in early ballots too is good. So we try to encourage that, because then people can think a little more deeply about their decisions before they cast their vote. There is a question over here, how can we get involved to help the passage of Amendment 4? Really, if you visit the Yes on 4 campaign website, it's Floridians Protecting Freedom. There's tons of opportunity. The big things right now are phone banking. There's live phone banking every Thursday. There's the Reach app. We have trainings for that every Tuesday. You can join your local league if you're not already a part of the local league. So we're always doing things. There's Super Saturday coming up this month. There's one once a month. Those are, in all of the major cities around the state, and they've done different things at each Super Saturday, but basically they work with you to train you on the language, on how to talk to friends, family, coworkers in a way that's not so confrontational and doesn't feel so hush hush. That's on the 20th on Saturday. So you can sign up for all of that on the website, and they're in hubs all around the state. And again, like, put the yard signs up, put the bumper stickers on. Just people need to know that the whole point of calling it Yes on 4 is people don't know how to vote. They know it might be up for a vote, but they don't know to vote yes. And that's why we're calling it Yes on 4. Yes on 4, yes means this thing gets through. And it makes it less confusing. So those are all ways you can help. yeah, if you have any other questions, there's lots of links that got shared in the beginning, and send me an email if you have questions about how to join anything and you missed the links earlier. I'll put my email in the chat here. And I've got yard signs and bumper stickers and palm cards available for pickup at my house here in St. Pete and at the Allendale Church. For league members, they are free. And for non-league members, we're just asking for like a $5 or $10 donation or whatever you feel comfortable gifting. So yeah, and is the raised hand a question?
I have one other question. So like, when we passed the felon, I don't remember what number it was, but so that felons could vote again, that immediately went up to the legislature, who kind of played around with it and made it so that instead of what we had intended, it came back as something that is still causing problems, because there are people who are not able to vote because of fees and fines and some of the things that they threw in there. Is there any concern that there's anything in this wording or something that's happened in other states that could mean that we went through all this and they're still going to make it difficult?
So I'm going to give you a very lawyerly answer here and say it depends. I think we can safely say that are the opposition going to play with this? Absolutely, yes. They're going to challenge it. There's going to be legal challenges to try to determine probably what viability means. Some other parts of the verbiage, they might, mess with some other parts. And what would happen is the case would get filed, and probably an organization like ACLU or Planned Parenthood or someone would get behind the suit. And there's something, you need standing to file suit. And what's ultimately happened in a lot of these pregnancy lawsuits is by the time they make it up to, like, let's say the Florida Supreme Court or some higher federal court, the woman has already given birth. And then there's an argument that there's not standing for the case because it's a moot point. There's nothing left to argue. It doesn't mean that they might not still try. There's going to be attempts. Certainly there's going to be legal attempts to try to pick this apart as much as possible. But it doesn't mean that it won't still be it's giving the legal resource, I guess, to fight that challenge. Say, no, it's this amendment passed. Here's what it means. And it gives us the opportunity to continue to argue and define things as we would like to. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. That's how the democracies work. That's how we kind of define our own legislation and our own text. So I don't think that should scare you. It's a good thing to put this into words, because right now we don't have that. And we're having all these little arguments on the side that are much more vague. So I think, and here we see what this will really do. The important message takeaway here is no one can legislate around this language anymore. Our Florida legislature will not be able to legislate because that's what this amendment's doing. It's limiting government interference, which means they can't now pass a law that says ban abortion at 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever. They can't do that after this is in place because there's no doctor on this planet that would say that's a viable pregnancy. So it's really putting some limits and some controls, and then we'll continue to, kind of fight and define that even more. And that might even change over time, but it gives us something as backing to work from. And I think that's really, really important. And it's as strong as I think it can and could be to get the vote that's needed for it to pass and still do something important and impactful and effective. And if you didn't attend our first webinar, it's up on the St. Pete League of Women Voters YouTube page. We had constitutional law experts on, and they talked a lot about this. Professor Varelli from Stetson Law was on, and he had some really good info. That's recorded if you want to go back and watch that. He's a much more well-versed and more entertaining expert than I am. So I would highly recommend that recording if you'd like to learn some more about that stuff. I think there's one more question.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for your help.
Oh yeah, of course. I do my best here. That's all I can do, right?
I had a question for Marla surrounding the November outcome, what you have been advising your clients to do, if there has been any discussion about potential field personhood laws here in this state, and what your clients who are having fertility issues are facing while waiting for November to happen.
I mean, I think it doesn't really change based on what happens in November necessarily. I think it's an evolving process that we just don't know what will happen. So it's just a matter of being vigilant of what the laws are, what laws are in the pipeline. And I think it's important to figure out, you know, what the laws are in the state where your embryos might be frozen, because they might be at your clinic, but many times, like I said, they're shipped off to a long-term storage facility that could be outside of Florida or the state where you created them. So I think it's just a matter of staying on top of what the laws are, what the laws might be. And as of now, nothing stops a patient from moving their embryos to another state if it's necessary. But I don't necessarily recommend just like running all around this, you know, the country with your embryos, because there's risks in moving them and you just don't know what the laws will be by the time you move them. So I think it's just a matter of just staying aware of what's happening, but I don't think anything drastic needs to happen at this time as far as embryo ownership. And as far as abortions go, we're just going to continue discussing it in advance before anyone's pregnant with their surrogate, and tailoring the language in their contract as necessary if travel is still permitted. And hopefully if the process is permitted in Florida without, you know, the 6-week ban, then we can then remove the travel requirement within the contract, hopefully.
Thank you. That's what I was curious about.
Yeah, I think that what I took away from Marla's presentation was the unfortunate grander aspect that comes with that is moving the embryos costs money, and so does you know, if surrogates need abortion care and it's not available in state, that costs money. And so an already very inaccessible system through, you know, fertility care becomes even more inaccessible when these bans are put in place and when restrictions are put in place. So I think that, you know, that's the message if anyone needs to bring that home to somebody. All right, everyone, thank you so much for being here this evening. We really appreciate your attendance, your participation in the league, and let me know if you need yes on 4 yard signs, bumper stickers, anything else, or if you have questions, we can we'll send out this recording to everyone who registered, and we'll include the sign up links for everything, how you can get involved on Yes and 4, and how you can get materials, all that good stuff. All right, have a great evening. Bye.